Yeah, it finally works.
Congratulations. I heard you did well at the debate the other day.
Oh, thank you. It's quite funny looking at how the media covers our events, right? Because as representatives, like we run, I mean, I'm just a candidate. You're actually a real representative, but like you'll speak, you'll say all these points, and then they'll see like, it was like an hour and a half.
Sure.
The only thing they reported was 3 seconds where I talked about DeFazio. That's it. It's like my name, these 3 seconds, the most controversial, and then they left out all the points.
Yeah. In PR training, they usually, tell you to stick to your talking points because then they have to fit it in. If that's all you say, but it makes for a very boring conversation if you just say the same thing repeatedly for 45 minutes.
Oh, I repeated myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just basically was hoping to speak to you because there's a lot of leaders in this community, people considering running for office, people who are trying to get more involved in politics, are trying to make a positive difference in our community. And I see you as one of the exceptions to the rule, one of the people who genuinely is trying to make a positive difference.
Sure.
And you can tell that because you go against moneyed interests at times when it's necessary. You go against these establishment interests to actually say something that's beneficial to the community, and not even yourself. Like you were defending other people's districts, right? In gerrymandering, it wasn't your own, and that ironically did become another concern later on. And I was just hoping if you could say a few points on what it was like. Why did you decide to take a stand against gerrymandering?
Yeah, it is sort of an odd thing to take a stand about, I suppose. For me, it's been about good governance, and maybe I watched I'm Just a Bill on the Hill too many times as a kid, but when I got elected to this district the first time, even while I was campaigning, you could see it was, what charitably might be called a leftovers district, right? What it really was a traditional pie wedge district where you have the point of the pie wedge in a high population density area of one party, and then a sort of broad hinterland of less dense territory of another party. But not only does that not meet the requirements of our redistricting statute, it is extremely difficult to represent, right? So if you represent a swing district, it's not impossible to have swing districts with common interests,
Right.
But this was definitely one that had very diverse interests. So there's a lot of farming interests in Lynn County, and then I've got the university, which and it's not Oregon State. If it was Oregon State, you might at least say, okay, well, it's the Ag University.
Nope, not the Ag University.
I've got a wide variety of constituents, and it makes it very difficult to represent them adequately. And so you can go two ways with that. You can just represent those who voted for you, right? Make essentially a base play. Or you could try to represent everybody and realize there's got to be some compromises with that. And I tried the latter. But I was always clear, in all these conversations, that the district was gerrymandered and that it needed to be fixed in the next go around. Rather than go through the blow by blow, I'll just say the maps as drawn did not meet the requirements of the law. And if people know one thing about me, it's that that's not something I'm willing to compromise on. Not only because it's the law, but which is, of course, very important to me, but also because it's bad for my constituents. The proposed map that I really objected to not only divided the university up between 3 House districts, but it divided the university up between 3 Senate districts as well, which takes some doing. And literally you had lines going down and meeting kind of by the EMU, and
oh my gosh.
And so it was just like, well, there are times you have to divide a place, and okay, fine, just do it honestly. But this was just more pie wedging, and so I organized my constituents and said, hey, submit testimony, and they did. I think over 100 pieces of testimony, and I think a dozen or so testimonials were done, and that corrected that. But that the fix left me in a district that has one neighborhood in Southeast Eugene that's probably one of the most liberal precincts in the state, and then a bunch of territory going down to Cottage Grove and out to Oak Ridge, and then around to sort of Leesburg, Blue River area, and then around to Coburg, but not Harrisburg, and then Junction City and even Cheshire. And it just doesn't, it made even less sense than the last district. And so, so I duly objected, but at the end of the day, actually, I was on military duty when it all went down, so I didn't really have any ability to influence the outcome. And
right. Yes.
So then, people ask me, well, why didn't you run anyway? I said, well, I mean, the reality is,
they changed
the district,
too much.
I mean, the district. I thought initially the data initially said that the district had a 10-point registration disadvantage for a Democrat, which it'd take a really good year for a Democrat to win. Later data suggested that deficit was between 0 and 5 points, depending how you counted it, performance, who turns out, that sort of thing. But still, that's the kind of district. I think the only, I think Representative Weber was the only one who was upside down by that much. And that race was, $1 million race. And having objected vociferously to the leadership's redistricting, I knew I wasn't the right candidate because there was no way they were going to invest that much money in me. And to be fair to my voters and the district more generally, I think they deserve someone that the leadership is willing to invest in. And so there's a candidate now who is a good fit for the district and should have the backing of leadership and is working hard. So there's electoral realities and political realities as well. So, and if we get campaign finance, maybe the answer is different. But as it stands right now, if you have a $200,000 race, you can probably get there with a robust funding one, but $1 million race is just not something that's realistic. I know. I'm in one. I mean, if Peter DeFazio wanted to run for state house, he could probably raise that kind of money. But little old me, I have a lot of dedicated folks, but they're not necessarily wealthy, and they don't have that kind of money to throw around. Nor do I have 36 years of Congress as he does. So that's the the way it goes. And I mean, it's you should never go into this business unless you're willing to leave it over something that's important to you, right? And so this was important enough for me to leave it. And they say, they say if you want a friend in politics, get a dog. I wouldn't go that far, but
get 2 dogs.
Yeah, get 2 dogs. Well, make friends across the aisle is what I'd say. If somebody has very different political beliefs than you and is still your friend, then that's a good friendship. But to be fair, I still have friends in the caucus, and
yes,
but it's a little difficult. But then, there's a sort of freeing aspect of realizing that you're not running for re-election. And so I was free to advocate for some of the things I really believe in. And so nonpartisan redistricting was one, open primaries is another, and campaign finance is really the third. And really, probably in reverse order there. I mean, without campaign finance reform, which the voters support by a margin of about 4 to 1, it's difficult to see anything changing.
Right.
And you just have to look at the governor's race and just the obscene amount of money being thrown around.
Even by
a few players, right? And so that's and so that if we were to change that, there's always holes in every system. I understand, but if you patch as many holes as you can, it makes it more difficult to just spend unlimited money on things like that. And often it's kind of dumb money, to be honest. I've never been impressed with the late campaign decisions that campaigns often make with expenditures.
Right.
But that brings us to number two, which is open primaries. I mean, if we were doing a top 2 or top 4 ranked choice or something like that, the picture would look very different, right?
Yes.
In the governor's race, I'm not picking a favorite. I just saw a poll that said, for instance, though, that people who answered the poll and said they were going to vote for Betsy Johnson are about 2 to 1 Democrats to Republicans, right? And so, what does that look like? And she's coming in 3rd in the polling. What does that look like in ranked choice? That looks like an easy Kotek win, right? Because that 14, 14 or so percent, or 10 to 15%, I guess, who are Democrats, they're probably not going to vote for Dresden, right? If they can't get Betsy, then they'll go for Tina. So, I mean, that's another one. The open primaries or ranked choice voting, that's another way of doing it. I realize there's practical objections, but it's also, I mean, we look at how Alaska's going, and I think what they got in Alaska for their special election for US Congress was a candidate who represents a lot of Alaskans, right?
Right.
That's the other one. I think there's a lot of moneyed interests, some I'm sympathetic to and some I'm not, that oppose that because they really do want to get the candidate the most in their direction as possible. And I understand that. I mean, we all want to elect people who believe as we do, but the closed primary system really encourages that. And then nonpartisan redistricting. I mean, it really is kind of obscene that the
politicians choose the voter
the other way around.
Right.
I had somebody asked a candidate, I'll remain nameless, if that candidate believed in a federal law on nonpartisan redistricting, and the candidate replied, yes, but they did not believe in what they called unilateral disarmament. And I just had to laugh because Oregon's law is already unilateral disarmament, right? We already say you're not supposed to do this. So, I mean, I came from a different background. Being a lawyer, being a military officer, I don't always like the law, but you got to follow it while it's the law. So, and I thought probably the most telling thing in this whole episode was in the legislature's response to the lawsuit filed on redistricting, one of their arguments was, we don't have to follow the law.
Oh my God.
And I was like,
they're like, we are above the law.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd go with that. That seems a little extreme to me. Of course, the legislature can change the law if it wants, but I don't think it can change it through the back door. I don't blame the lawyer for making that argument, but I do kind of blame the presiding officers for letting them file a document that said that.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, I've had that debate before too. When our staff unionized, the response from the legislature was, it's unconstitutional for you to unionize. And I said, I don't want a document out there that says that me, Marty Wilde, believes that it's unconstitutional for our staff to unionize. I mean, like,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah.
That doesn't fit with my beliefs. So, I'm a lawyer and I work for a client, and I think we should tell the lawyers who represent us that is not an argument that we want forwarded. And indeed, it was not a persuasive argument in the end. But I've often thought we needed to have sort of tighter control over the things we say, because frankly, we're not any other litigant. We represent the people, and we should be responsible with the arguments we make in court. And frankly, the crazy ones that really go against our values don't prevail anyway.
Right. Yeah. You gave a couple examples there where it kind of sounds like the people flaunting the law don't even know what the law is. It's like they're breaking in without knowing it. Like, they're breaking these norms. Some of them may know, some may not. And I think there's just a culture of, like, whether it's unionization of the workers in the state, or whether it's the other checks on redistricting, they just don't like any challenge to their power. Just any challenge to the power is just not acceptable.
Well, it's, everybody's got a boss, right? And my boss is the voters, but then the voters express their values through the Constitution. And so, I can't tell you, there were a number of times where, so what happens is you submit an idea to the Legislative Council for drafting, and the Legislative Council draft whatever you want. But if it's unconstitutional, they'll attach a memo that says, "Hey, we'll draft whatever you want, but this is probably unconstitutional." I've gotten a couple of those memos myself, and I, either changed the idea or discarded it. But what would happen was several times, an idea would get circulated in the legislature, and I would sort of go, "Look, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but that sounds a little sketchy." So I'd go and ask the Legislative Council, and usually very quickly I'd get a response that says, "Oh yes, we have concerns about the constitutionality." In fact, so quickly that I knew that they'd already written that memo. And so getting back to your main point about the culture of lack of concern, there are people who just, they'll get that memo and they just, ball it up and throw it away. And I'm like, well, look, I swore to uphold the Constitution, right? I mean, I don't always like the answer the Constitution gives.
You did, not them.
Well, we all start with the same oath, right? And so I mean, sometimes you can do it a different way. Sometimes it's just straight up unconstitutional, and if you want to do it, you have to ask the voters to change it. And which is something you can do. We asked, for voter campaign finance reform, we did, and the voters are not unreasonable.
No.
We've made, and there's always fixes, right? They're not always political. There was one that, should judges be allowed to serve in the National Guard? Because technically they're serving in two different branches of government. Well, there were already like 3 or 4 judges serving in the Guard. So, it was going to be awkward if the answer was no, but the voters are like, "Oh yeah, we're fine with that," And I think we also said that they can teach classes at universities. All right, cool. But you can ask the voters to change it, but what you can't do is just say, thumb your nose at the Constitution and be like, no. Now the redistricting stuff was all statutory, so arguably they could have passed a plan that says we are overriding this section and we want to do this, but that would not have been politically palatable, right? To say, well, we're just going to change the law because we don't like it. I really am a supporter of nonpartisan redistricting. I guess we're going to have a case in the Supreme Court about it in terms of the, it's a little wacky, the primacy of the state legislature and whether the courts really have the authority to oversee redistricting. I think you gotta, just some of these maps are just crazy. And you're basically eroding, the principle of one person, one vote. So.
Right, which is the fundamental to the whole system functioning as it should. Of course, the Electoral College and other schemes we have also take away from one person, one vote, because one person's one vote is not equal to another vote. But I get what you're saying.
That is sort of a fundamental problem in our U.S. Constitution, right? The Electoral College and all that stuff.
Yes.
But by the time we got to the founding, the Oregon Constitution in whatever it was, 1859, Oregon statehood, they changed it to be by population, and it was 2 House districts to every Senate district, and so didn't have the same problem really, at least in the state constitution. So, now we're over 150 years out of date with the state of the art in our federal constitution, but there, there are always compromises in these documents, and
that's true.
The challenge is, you can't just ignore them, right? The workaround for the Electoral College is either to amend the Constitution, or like as we did in my first session, we passed the national popular vote. Just said, okay, we're gonna change the rule and say when we get a majority of the votes in the Electoral College, whoever wins the national popular vote gets our votes, and in the Electoral College. So that seems kind of an elegant solution.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of balances out a little bit better there.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, now that you've been a representative for a while, do you think that for people who are interested in politics and interested in making things better, as I said before, is there any inside baseball that you might like something voters don't know about how things work that you know as somebody actually in the system?
Oh,
Like,
I mean, there's no secret handshake or anything. I think you have to come into it with good values, and um, I say this a lot, especially when I do mediation, but you have to look at people's interests, right? Um, and they'll take positions like, oh, you should support this bill or that bill, but you look at the interests behind them, and so interests are just another way of saying values. And so for me, at the end of the day, the two values that were most important to me were following the will of the voters, and it wasn't just redistricting. There was a couple other bills that, frankly, I personally liked, but my voters didn't like, and respect for the rule of law was another one. Other people, have different values, and so I think the challenge, when you come into a caucus, how should I put this? When you come into a caucus, I think there's the assumption, perhaps naively, that everybody shares the same interests and our values. And that's not always true. I mean, obviously you share some
right.
broad brush values, or you wouldn't be in the same party. But so I would say, be true to your values. Realize there are things worth losing the job for, and be willing to walk away. There were a lot of people who were beating up on Betsy Johnson for voting fairly conservatively. And I said, have you looked at her district? Like,
right.
They're very happy with Betsy Johnson in her district,
Right. You mean democracy?
Yeah,
the thing where you represent people? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, those inner Portland districts aren't very happy with her, but she doesn't represent them, and so similarly with me, I mean, I know I had constituents who were very unhappy with me for some of the positions I took, and then sometimes I took positions that made me unhappy because it was their values. It just sometimes you do have to jump one way or another, and then it's not always clear what the will of the voters is. But when the will of the voters is clear, that was important to me. So I guess what I would say is, if you go into politics, just you have to be true to yourself, I suppose. And sometimes that means find another job. And I would say almost every other job pays better. So, I mean, I was laughing in terms of like looking at, my next thing and sort of balancing my household budget. I was like, well, I mean, the good news is whatever I do will pay better.
Right. Yeah, that's true. That's very true. The thing is, like, I feel like the system loses out by more honest people such as yourself being willing to. So it's very true that be true to yourself and be willing to quit the job if it comes down to a very moral decision that you feel a line you just can't cross. The problem is that leaves a system of people who can cross lines. So like all the people left in the bucket are the people who have no problem crossing lines. So I feel like if we could find a way to keep people like you in longer and over multiple things and be able to waver those storms and go through to the next cycle. The problem is it's so easy to get rid of good people, so hard to keep them. And so like
I mean it's I mean we've in fairness, we've kept people Betsy, Arnie Roblin, Caddy McCune. It's not impossible to have a long career and have differences in values. What I would say about all of them compared to me, to be fair, is that they all had very strong senses of themselves, and they did not define themselves by their relationships within their caucus. So, I mean, that irritated their caucuses sometimes, but they weren't belligerent. They were just, willing to take a firm stand. But it's also, I would also say, you got to be clear where you stand. I think good communication within the caucus is also important. And one of the things I liked about Betsy is you always knew where she stood. I mean, there was never a time I was surprised at the way Betsy voted. That everybody knew how she felt, and like either where she was with you or she wasn't. But that's fine. I mean, if you have a good sense of your district, you want to do that. Anyway, in terms of all the honest people leave. That's not necessarily true.
I just think incentives. I don't mean everybody.
Oh,
I probably
yeah,
should be clear. I just mean
yeah, there are
generally
incentives.
speaking.
I mean, the campaign finance reform is the one that's kind of the clearest right now. Like, you know, the campaigning is about raising money, you know, among other things.
Yes.
Money is the big piece of it. And the Senate's always opposed campaign finance reform because they raise a lot of money. And, you know, limiting that money, you know, would limit their influence.
Yeah,
As far
that's
as the
why actually
House, I mean, back and forth. So
we probably.
okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. I was just saying we probably disagree on this point a bit because I'm taking no money in my thing, and I believe people should run for office on their ideas only. But
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
also a third-party candidate, and I'm less likely to win. So in terms of most likely to win, strategically, they accept money. The problem I have with that system is, as you've made many great points on that, I'm a little bit different because like Betsy Johnson, she does let you know where she stands. But if you look at her fundraising for this election, she has more money than a lot of the other ones earlier on. And if you actually look at the list of those people, you're like, okay, how much change are we going to see when that guy who runs real estate, that guy who runs pharma, that guy who runs this, like, you know what I'm saying? Like the real big questions, I don't know how much you can do when you take that much money. But I do think she has a lot of good points. She's good at working with different teams. There's a lot of legitimate points there. And so I'm not trying to be overly, I'm probably a bit more extreme on that point than most people might be, where I just don't want to take anything. But I think you're more reasonable, and that's probably why you're not.
I mean, you know, from my perspective, you know, and I would say this to any candidate coming in, you play by the rules of the game at the time, you know. I mean, unless you, especially if you're a new candidate. I mean, if you're coming in with some fabulous name recognition and, you know, you can get 1 million donors all over the country, that's a different story. But like if you're Joe Blow like me, some guy who just wants to be, you know, in his community, then, you know, you play the game and, you know, and go from there. I mean, what else would I say? Yeah, I think you're right. The other thing I would say is it really is a full-time job, and you know, you have to find some way to you know, balance your household budget, you know, whether that's having a spouse who works.
Which you shouldn't have to.
I mean,
pay them a full-time wage.
Like, yeah, I mean,
that seems like a good way. Making it so your politicians have to take money in order to feed their family seems like a bad system for corruption.
Well, you know, there was the other one to do was like, okay, well, you can use campaign money for other things. So I think when Val was majority leader, she also directed Future PAC and paid herself a salary out of that, and we changed the rules to make that happen. Like, you know, I guess as long as you're transparent about it.
That's a very generous attitude. I would not take.
Well, I mean, would I prefer a different system? Yeah, I think we should have a full-time legislature that meets 4 or 6 weeks, you know, every 12 weeks, you know, 2 years, and you know, we should have campaign finance reform. We should have nonpartisan redistricting. We should have open primaries. I mean, there's lots of things that we need to change, but you know, I think if we do campaign finance reform, I think other things will follow. I think you're right about that. And it's just, you know, everybody focuses on the top line number of the cap on the limit on individual donations. But there's a number of backdoors, and the you know, the devil's in the details. And the question on campaign finance reform is really, well, how much do some of those backdoors have to be open to keep transparency? I mean, if you closed every backdoor all the way and just set a flat cap, what you get is sort of unrestricted third-party expenditures. And a lot of these nasty ads on TV right now are third-party expenditures.
Yes, that's correct.
So, I mean, it's nuanced, but I think, you know, I think we can get there. And, you know, frankly, it's going to be an iterative process. But once you get, you know, started, then, you know, you can come back the next time and tweak things to get it where you need to be.
Yeah, momentum. You need some momentum.
Yeah.
Right. Like you
So
seem to understand that you can't do all at once. You have to kind of pick your battles, try to pick
yeah,
what's most important, and let that snowball over time, and then tweak things as you go. That's how you do
yeah,
good governance. You don't do all in one
yeah,
revolutionary changes that end up backfiring.
yeah. You know, the other thing I would say that really needs to change in the legislature, and you know, there's an article I wrote for the Oregonian that says essentially this, but Oregonians deserve to see the functioning of their government, and we have far too many things that are decided, you know, by a couple people in a back room, and so
Right.
uh, you know, they pass with a majority vote, so you know they're passing the constitutional thing. But in this age of hyper partisanship, the fact that we never show people um, debating their viewpoints of their people, of their voters, and
Yes.
coming to reasonable compromises really undermines people's ability to have confidence in the result. One of the things I saw in mediation is, you know, once people feel like they had their say, they were much more accepting of an answer, you know, a result.
Yes.
And they were much more likely to follow the order that resulted. And so I think, you know, that writ small, writ large is, you know, if the electorate sees things play out and, you know, then they can have some sense that indeed their voices were heard and maybe they prevailed and maybe they didn't, but we can move forward, you know, and on to the next issue. And so I think one of the great casualties of our part-time system is the sense that everything has to happen quickly behind a closed door and that the fix
Right.
is in, and that just feeds into this hyper-partisanship. So
Absolutely. That's
yeah.
well said on that point. Yes.
So I mean, there's a lot of things that feed a partisan. Yeah, the other one is you know, who has time to be in leadership? Um, you know, a friend of mine who's in a swing district told me when I came in, he said, here's the thing about being in a swing district, you're never going to be in leadership because you always have to be running, right? And you have to take unpopular votes, right? Sometimes, well, they're popular for your people, but unpopular in your caucus. And so, you know, what we end up with a closed primary system and no campaign finance reform is, and partisan redistricting is, the leaders overwhelmingly come from very blue or very red districts. And so what you get is sort of a deep skew instead of, you know,
Right.
more moderate approach. So I mean, it's unfortunate, but I mean, we'll see what happens. I think there's some progress likely to be made on campaign finance reform. I mean, the voters just so obviously want it. I think to a degree,
Yeah,
people are terrified
absolutely.
that if they don't do it right, then the voters are going to pass something very strict, which, you know, wouldn't hurt my
I
feelings.
feel like it could get way worse.
Yeah, I mean, you want a
They're like,
$250
is that
cap?
dumpster on
Okay.
fire yet? Okay.
I mean, I also, you know, I also fund. I mean, I have a few large donations, but most of my fundraising, you know, was small donors, and so
Right.
I'm quite comfortable with that. But I mean, a lot of people aren't. I mean,
Yeah.
so, anyway, we should probably wrap it up. I gotta get over the university
Yes.
for 3 o'clock. But anything else you want to cover before we go?
Oh no, that was excellent. You covered it wonderfully.